And then
You're so good.
well, I do appreciate you letting me join you, and I know that I initially was a little apprehensive because I'm not a licensed mental health therapist, and I know there are just a lot of things. Even when you start talking to somebody who has faced trauma, there's a lot that goes into it rather than just a set of X's and O's on a whiteboard and here's what you should eat and here's what you shouldn't do. And I think there's a lot of danger to just giving dogmatic information to somebody who's not ready for that kind of work. If there has to be, more integration into, that particular trauma. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm so glad that you asked me to, because I know as long as everybody understands that my scope of practice is going to be, primarily describing nutrition and how I think it can help, exactly as you described, Catherine. You know, regardless of somebody's background, everybody does start at a certain level of knowledge when it comes to how much we can impact our own bodies and how much our bodies impact our minds and our thoughts and even our just life trajectory. So it's one of the things that got me started as a young boy. Even before I was a teenager, I did not come from any kind of background that would push me into this as a way of cocooning myself, away from insecurity. A lot of people start that way, except I kind of ordered that. And I would say, if you look at somebody like me who was a preteen and in a family that wasn't particularly healthy, and there was a lot of obesity and just nobody talked about health. But then as I got into school and a particular friend invited me to be part of athletics, I had this first initial sense of awareness that I can impact my physical being. I can be healthier. I can lose body fat. I can gain muscle. So as just a preteen and then teenage boy, that really had an impact on me. And then, as you mentioned, Catherine, I've helped a lot of people since.
Um, and you have a franchise all over the United States, which is amazing. I used Michael Wilkie's
Mhm.
franchise 3 years ago, and took third place at the INFB Amateur World Championships, the short old lady division. So that I love your philosophy, and the philosophy that your franchises, of course, outshoots of you, really making things personal. So like you just said, it isn't a one and done, and isn't a one size fits all. Everybody's a little bit different. And there are some fundamentals, like for instance, and I'm just going to use me as an example, because I think it's the way to go. When I came out of my living on the street, I didn't know how much water somebody should drink. Um, you hear eight glasses a day. Well, is that glass? Is it that glass? So how does water affect the human body? Is it really necessary? And isn't there water in coffee? And isn't there water in soda? So I'm thinking of the women I work with.
Mhm.
Is that enough water? What role does water play in the mental well-being of human beings? I know from dehydration, it can exacerbate anxiety and panic, but I'll let you talk about that.
It's funny you bring up something like that as a basic fundamental of life and nutrition, because I have two daughters. One is 18 and one is 24. And throughout their entire lives, they have never come to me for questions on nutrition and things like that, which is fine. I never wanted to be that father. I have two sons and two daughters. Never wanted to be that dad who makes somebody feel pressured to be a certain thing or study a certain field or even look a certain way. So there was just never any pressure. There was never even communication. until somebody would bring up a topic, and then I could just speak very objectively about it like I would any other topic. And so ironically, just about 6 months ago, both of my daughters bought these gigantic gallon jugs that are marked, with exact
Yeah.
by 10 a.m. you should be here, and by noon you should be here. And it was simply because they read some article somewhere and said, yes, water's necessary, and it's great because 65 to 75% of our bodies are water, and even down to just cellular metabolism. If you're not hydrated, you're not going to think as clearly. Your immune system's not going to be as healthy, and even body fat loss does not occur as efficiently if you're not hydrated. So that's a great place to start, Catherine, because I think so many people have questions that are that dogmatic. Tell me exactly what I need to do and I'll do it. And again, without being a licensed mental health therapist, I think, because of the reading I have done, that people who have suffered through traumatic backgrounds, they often struggle between how much autonomy they should have and how much they should listen to authority. And of course, they've been told in a very high state of malfeasance that you just shut up and listen and do what I say. And so it's almost by reflex that we look for information that is that dogmatic. Just tell me exactly what I need to do. If you say I should have 100 ounces of water a day, I'll do 100 ounces of water a day. And my entire background in nutrition, the way I teach it is to give the maximum amount of autonomy and let people decide what's best for them. And we can say, here's what we know about quality and health, and here are the things that are great for you. Now let's pick the changes you want to make at your speed, at your pace, dependent upon your goals. And that little simple example of water is just a great entry, as I said, into the whole philosophy of, what should we look like? Why should we eat a certain way? If we can look at a list of do's and don'ts, maybe we could get under that letter of the law, so to speak, and just start applying what's best for me personally at this time in my life.
Beautifully said. For me, when I first came off of the street, I wasn't menstruating because I was so malnourished. So I was, I don't know, maybe 98 pounds or something, just because of the anxiety. It wasn't anorexia or something. It was just my anxiety attacks and panic attacks were just like one after another. And my motivation for drinking water or eating something wasn't about how I look or fighting some sort of a system of rebellion. I don't want to be told what to do. It was, please God, help me feel better. Because the way that I felt, I just wanted to die. I mean, it was just living in chronic, night terrors and panic attacks. So everything I did, my motivation for it was, can I get out of the extraordinary emotional pain I was in? And just water made such a difference. That basic, just water, understanding that water, not soda, not coffee, not tea, not whatever, that water affected my brain in a way that it helped me think clear, and it helped the poison, whatever in my body, the toxins in my body go out of me. It's like taking out the trash through having a good bowel movement. And then the second thing that helped me was understanding sleep, that really having a routine with sleep for no other reason than if I could sleep and I could drink water, that would make me feel so much better. So there's so much that I couldn't control, but these were the things that I could. So just for water for a moment, what is the rule of thumb for if somebody just wanted to do one little tiny thing, and that was taking on drinking enough water. And your daughters, that's all over Instagram. They're big jugs, 9 a.m., 11 a.m. They're funny, hard to carry around with you, but they're funny. What would a general rule of thumb be? How much water does somebody need? And then when you move into maybe sleep and protein, carbs.
Yeah, so just the typical public health range on that is eight glasses, 8 ounces of water. So you're looking at 64 ounces, which is exactly a half a gallon. And unlike my daughters, I don't have quite the dogma, but I do have this 32-ounce thing, and I try and have that gone by noon. So there's 32 ounces. And then I work out in the early afternoon, and I typically have at least 32 more ounces. And then probably by the time I've gone to bed, I'm getting up to about 3/4 of a gallon. And if I were talking to a professional athlete or somebody who is in that kind of a major transformative mode, they're really trying to lose body fat, working out, gaining muscle, performance, all of that stuff, I would say even up to a gallon is a pretty good amount. It's a good goal. And if you fall a little short, you're still above the half a gallon that's at least recommended. So anywhere in that half to a full gallon. And then interestingly, or not, because human beings are like this, some people take it to an extreme. So if 1 gallon is good for me, I'll drink 4. And I've had some professional athletes do stuff like that. And then you can get into a problem of leaching minerals out of your body. They're cramping muscularly. You could even, in a worst case scenario, hypernatremia, you can kill yourself by drinking too much water because you leach so much, mineral content out of your body, your heart stops. So obviously that's an extreme that very few people are ever going to have to worry about. But just to show you that there are these ranges for a reason. And then, as you mentioned, we'll end up talking about protein, carbohydrates, fat, calories. Everything in biology is certainly measurable. And it's difficult to conceptualize sometimes because we just don't know it. You don't, like, unlike your car where you can check your oil and see exactly where it is and how much life is left before you get your oil changed. We're not constantly monitoring our blood panel, comprehensively. Maybe once a year you get a physical, but we just don't know these things. So we have to kind of trust some of the data, some of the information that's out there.
So I do that with water. I fill up a gallon of warm water every day. And my first glass of water is a nice, really warm glass of water with a lemon in it. And that's my first thing that I do in the morning is, drink that. So, and like you said, I fill up my gallon and maybe I hit a half a gallon, or maybe I hit 3/4 of a gallon, or maybe I hit the whole gallon. Yay, but at least I have something that I'm shooting for. And I'm 5 feet, so I don't do more than a gallon. Gallon is it. That's, I'm urinating maybe once an hour, and that's plenty. And then no matter how much water I've had that day, I stop drinking water 3 hours before bed or about that. Otherwise, I'm up in the night, and now I'm disrupting my quality of sleep. So for me, as an older woman, that's what works for me. I just sort of end it. I'm not so focused on getting that last drop of water in right before bed that, oh no, I've gotten 3/4 of a gallon, so now I'm going to drink a quarter of a gallon because I want to succeed. I just say, okay, you are where you're at, and go to the bathroom and go to sleep.
Perfect.
So Dr. Joe, on the, we hear so much information coming in, particularly since COVID. I think everybody is selling, gosh, it's just been exponential information coming in. It's just overwhelming information, workouts and all these different things. So for somebody who's, again, this audience, how does somebody find out how many calories they're supposed to be eating? I always tell people to go to your website. I say, look, there's 3 websites. I tell them, your macro calculator is free. It's incredible on your site, bodybuilding.com, Fitness Pal, take those three, see what the commonalities are of those three, and then play with it. But that's me. What would you say? You're the expert.
Well, there are a lot of different formulas out there for the amount of calories we should consume. And, the one thing you should definitely get away from is the typical standard governmental information. If you look at a fact panel on any food, it always says these percentages and these quantities are based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet. But through a lot of study, we know that the average basal metabolic rate, just the average rest metabolism calorie need of an adult male, is about 1,650 calories, and an adult male or female is about 1,350 calories. So what I tell people is first start with that information: 1,350 for a female, 1,650 for a male. That's the average across the board of all adult Homo sapiens. Well, remember, first of all, that the average is the 50-yard line. So half of the people will need more than that. Half of the people will actually need less. So now you have to have a little bit of understanding about your genetics. And for me, for example, my siblings, my parents, grandparents, we tend to be moderately overweight to obese. And as soon as I hit puberty and so forth, and even with my kids, you see that tendency just as a phenotype that we start gaining body fat. And then, if you become pregnant, you gain even more body fat. And as you get older, you just gain more. And so my dad had a pacemaker by the time he was 59 years old and died of heart disease when he was 65. His dad died of heart disease when he was 65 or younger. His mom died of heart disease in her 60s. And so that's just that natural trajectory of understanding your genetics. And so 1,350 calorie base for a female, 1,650 for a male. Then you have to understand genetics, and that's basal metabolic rate. So then you have to add in your goals if you're trying to gain or lose weight. And then you also have to consider if you're working out, those are extra calories, or if you just have an extensively active job, you're an Amazon worker walking 10 miles a day or something like that. So that gets you in the ball game, but then I like to do one or two more checks on that, Catherine. And one of them is to just take your goal weight, whatever you think would be a healthy goal estimated weight, and multiply that times 10. So for me, if I thought, man, 175 pounds is the perfect weight for me, that would be 1,750 calories. So a little bit more than that 1,650, that gets me at least another range to consider. And then if you happen to be, a little bit more muscular or even have more body fat, you can multiply your current weight times 10. So, my current weight is around 180. And so I can say, okay, that's 1,800 calories because I'm carrying a little bit more body mass, and that does require extra calorie expenditure. So if you just remember those averages and then that 10 times rule, I think that gives you a nice range. You mentioned going to an online calculator, which those exist, and we have one, the macrodoc.com. So you can answer a few questions about your height, weight, age, energy level, how many times a day you eat, that sort of thing. And there are algorithms that will kick out a number for you. But again, that could be very arbitrary. You could be
Right.
could be on a calculator that's really, really good or one that's really bad.
Well, I love that because for me, having such chronic panic and anxiety back then, I needed things to be steady and consistent, as even keel as possible. I'm trying to, I imagine panic attacks and anxiety attacks as, crazy energy, right? There's lots of fireworks energetically. And I'm wanting to bring that down and have a nice, steady, calm sleep. Nice, steady, calm energy going through the day, regular bowel movements, getting a good night's sleep, nothing too crazy. And some of the things that were crazy making for me was caffeine. caffeine would really stimulate me. A lot of the sodas would have more caffeine than Coca-Cola. So some of the foods that I would ingest or drink, eat, whatever, ingest, could really jack me up. And sugar being one of them. And I don't know if regular people really understand the physical effects of caffeine and sugar, what it does in sort of catching fire, the craziness that's already in people who are suffering from anxiety and panic. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, so both of those are probably, even though they're incredibly different, they are the two chemicals that we encounter the most that can have a real impact on not just energy, but energy balance, because you have subsequent lows every time you have that supercharged high. So, the interesting thing is a lot of people don't really feel a lot due to caffeine unless you're taking some kind of a supplement. You can take a pre-workout supplement that gives you, they used to be 150 or 100 milligrams of caffeine. Then they went up to 200. Now some of them have 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine, which is
Wow.
almost like, it's almost like a stroke in a pill. I mean, it literally can raise your blood pressure so high so fast. Most people who just have a couple cups of coffee or tea or a soft drink, they just never really feel a massive surge of energy from caffeine. So it's a little bit of a false goal to say, well, I need energy, so I need my coffee, because you just don't get that much. But cumulatively, by the time you're trying to go to sleep or you're faced with a little bit higher anxiety of a situation or decision, all of a sudden, all of those milligrams you've consumed all day have a much more dramatic impact. And so, I talk to a lot of people who have a very difficult time sleeping, and the pattern is always pretty consistent, where they're just consuming small amounts of caffeine all day to the point where their nervous system can't shut off when it should. So, the interesting thing is caffeine is also probably the most adaptive substance that we encounter on a regular basis. So if you consume 500 milligrams every single day, then very quickly, within just a couple weeks, that becomes your norm. Now you have to have that, or you just don't even feel awake. So to reduce your levels to the bare minimum is so essential. So that way you can actually use it as a tool if you need. I'm not a coffee drinker, and I'll use maybe a half a dose of a pre-workout caffeine-based stimulant, for some of my bigger workouts if I really feel I want that. But I do that so it strategically matters. It has the impact I want, and it doesn't have the negative impacts I don't want. So, that's where a lot of people do struggle with caffeine.
With caffeine and sugar,
Alana.
is the consumption of it, I'm making this up, so I want to know if it's true or not. What I make up is that when I am just dragging on one day and I look at what I consumed the day before, all that sugar and caffeine that I consumed, I didn't get the good night's sleep that I needed. So I wake up and I'm groggy. So I want more caffeine to sort of get me going. And then, I hit that afternoon lull, and then I want a little more caffeine. And or I'm hungry, really I'm tired. My brain is saying I'm hungry, but really I'm just tired. Is there biology to what I'm saying that makes what I'm saying, my reality, true? And how would somebody stop the madness? How does somebody, I guess you just have to do it on a weekend and just decrease your caffeine and sugar and know that you're going to be tired, and plan for a couple of days of that before you sort of right the ship.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that's a really good strategy. And the funny thing is, I do that to myself as a little bit of a gut check when I travel. So, if in perceptively, I would think, I may need more caffeine because I'm traveling. I could be, getting a little less sleep and that kind of thing. But I generally just avoid those kind of normal habits of a caffeine energy drink or something, because it's just a unique time for me to kind of wash out those things out of my body as a bit of a reset. And I think the biggest point is what you said. It's a substitute for sleep. And so then you increase your tolerance to it, which makes you want and, quote, need more caffeine. And you just create this never ending cycle where, then you're probably disrupting the sleep you could get because you're taking so much caffeine. And sleep has been a huge buzzword in the media and culture for about the last decade. Ariana Huffington wrote this book about it, and that got on the radar of a lot of people. You hear people like Joe Rogan on his podcast talk about it all the time as he describes different tenets of health. He just interviewed Matthew McConaughey this last week, and McConaughey said, "I get 9.5 hours of sleep every night. We just will not break that rule in my life because I just physically need it." And I can look at the different genetics of people, even in my own family, and that's very true. I function just fine on 6, but I have a rule to always get 7. My wife really needs 8 or 9, as does one of my daughters. I have one son and one daughter who genetically take a little bit more after me, and so you just see those differences again in those phenotype sets or groupings of people. But if you're not getting what you need in sleep, your immunity suffers, you're cutting years off of your life, and other behaviors will suffer. We know that willpower, for example, if you have anything in your life you're trying to accomplish, whether it's some kind of a body or mind transformation, or you're going through school, you're working really hard, working 2 or 3 jobs to accomplish this goal, when you are not getting enough sleep, nothing else goes well. It's just not. You almost have to, view sleep as the most central part of your life success, from your health to your mental well-being to academic or intellectual pursuits, physical, of course. One of the examples I have is that people who regularly get 5 or fewer hours of sleep a night have a 68% increased chance of obesity. And just like you described for caffeine, Catherine, when we're just too tired and we're constantly reaching for caffeine, we also reach for sugar and other energy substitutes, just those calories, as a medicinal substitutes. And of course, then it takes our health even further away from where we want it.
Dr. Joe, we see so much right now about being vegan, water diets, which just blows my mind, water fasting, intermittent fasting, juicing. What I make up, because my goal is consistent, steady, radiant health, keeping the train on the tracks. And when I think about all these different tricks, besides, I think, subtle carb deviating, little bits of carb, that's a minor sort of thing versus big, huge things that I am just screwing with that steady thing that I'm trying to do. Whether it is the all raw way of eating, that was the big deal, the body type, blood type thing. It's all like this, celery, whatever it is. I like just steady, tried and true. When I go jacking with anything, now I'm jacking with my energy. Now I'm jacking with my sleep. Now I'm jacking with my energy. And I just sort of, I go off course. You've been doing this a long time. I mean, you look like you're in your 20s, but you've been doing this a long time. For you, sort of historically looking and seeing the result of the athletes that you work with, is there a place for some of the crazier stuff? And I'm saying crazy, but the different things that I hear or is there just a steady, this is what works, it's not rocket science?
Well, it's great that you framed it like that, as these are, not normal things. They're extremes. They're out there in the media. People reach for them, almost in desperation. And ironically, that's exactly how most of humans' brains work. I mean, if we want a goal, we want to really achieve it. We're serious about it. And so we fall prey to all of the misinformation, the hype, the marketing spin that's out there that says if you just do this, then it's endless. I mean, it's so
It really
endless.
is.
Not just from food and so forth, but from how to make $1 million in your sleep and blah blah blah. And interestingly, I view these things sometimes as tools that we can use. Most of the time, they're not, but there could just be this conflation that's hard to understand. So I'll go to your first example of fasting. Um, if I'm just trying to lose weight and I'm desperate to look good in my wedding dress, does fasting for a week do me any good? I mean, you're probably going to have this rebound. You're going to feel horrible for a week, and it's probably worse off for your health in the long run because you don't know how to implement that. But are there reasons to do some kind of a medically induced or health reason, fast? And yeah, there can be. It's a tool you can use if you understand it. There are people who integrate it well. You even mentioned the latest in the long line of fasting methods, intermittent fasting. And so to say there's this 16-hour window where you shouldn't eat, is that a horrible piece of advice? No, because it gets people to say, well, I guess I shouldn't eat after dinner. So if I just eat from breakfast to dinner, have my 3 or 4 meals in there, that's not bad advice. But if you feel like you have to stick to it like a religion, and life is going to fall apart if you don't do it, then you're kind of missing the point. So I know people who still to this day will fast 1 day per week as just part of their normal health and give themselves kind of a day to recalibrate. And little things like that can be very helpful for some people. For other people, it just becomes this line in the sand that is a rigid fixed rule that again layers just a gradual brick wall against our own freedom, our own autonomy. We just want to live in this house we construct full of rules, and I just don't think that's the best way to live.
Agreed. So again, I'm thinking of the audience. I'm thinking about people who are sort of dealing, I'll just say mild depression. They're having anxiety and panic attacks. Uh, maybe yes, maybe no, taking medication for that. And they're just trying to find health, find health. So we've talked about calculators and you gave us great advice. Your ideal weight, if it's not what you already are, times 10. Shooting for, at the end of the day, you've consumed a minimum of a half a gallon of water, maximum a whole gallon of water. You're being careful with caffeine and not doing extra, because when you do extra, that becomes your new standard. And then you're sort of in a vicious trap and it affects your sleep. Seeing sleep as your most primary key to self-care is getting whatever that sleep is for you. If it's 6 hours, if it's 9 hours, knowing what that is and really, really honoring that for yourself in your life. Sugar and also caffeine being that the chemicals that can sort of throw us off track. That there's tried and true food, doing intermittent fasting as a tool when needed, or something if it works for you, great, but doing anything sort of outrageous is probably not in our best interest to do that. Bowel movements. I'd mentioned before we started recording that I didn't know about water. We never had the conversation about bowel movements. And that is, bowel issues are such a big deal, and nobody really talks about that. So what, generally speaking, what is a human being ideally supposed to have? One a day? Is it 1 to 3 a day? What do you think about laxatives and stool softeners and all that? What is the 101 on bowel movements?
So it's an interesting topic because, as you said, not a lot of people discuss it and don't think that there's a standard. Um, I did my first doctoral dissertation on the nutritional management of inflammatory bowel disease because it's something that is common in my family, something that I had struggled with in different forms, even a severe case, early in life. And so it was something, as you mentioned, to kind of figure out and see if we can control it and manage it and make sure there's some kind of livable standard. And unfortunately, because of some of the really unhealthy ways we eat, and then some of the ways we try and eat in ways we think are really healthy, we can create a lot of just pain and bloating and gas and trauma, constipation versus diarrhea in our GI habits. And our intestinal tract is pretty much on a 24-hour cycle. So for people who are eating a pretty consistent, normal, healthy diet, I would say that one bowel movement a day is very standard. But based on the types of food you eat and the quantity, that can fluctuate. If somebody's in a planned calorie deficit, they're dieting and working really hard. If they're not having a lot of bulk in their food, they may have a bowel movement, once every 2 days, and that's normal. Other people may have 3 bowel movements a day, and that's normal. But what's not normal is having, the pain and the bloating, as you described earlier, and any kind of a fecal urgency, whether it's you really have to feel like you have to go all the time, but then you can't and you're constipated, or you're having just massive amounts and frequencies of loose stools, diarrhea, that sort of thing. Those are very fast track ways to having chronic bowel conditions that become structural. You can end up with inflammatory bowel disease, that could include ulcerative colitis or something like that. And it's good to see that recently there has been a lot of attention paid to this, even by the pharmaceutical industries trying to find, I wouldn't even say palliative ways to control it, but tissue level ways to reduce inflammation and make sure that those organs can function as they should. But how we eat food, the foods we decide to eat, have the single greatest impact. So the first thing to think of is, as we've described, water. Hydration is important consistently, but then we have to have the right amount and type of fiber. Too little is a problem. Too much is a problem. So an awful lot of people, as soon as they decide I'm going to be healthier, they start eating more vegetables. And you mentioned a raw food diet, so they're eating tons of raw vegetables. That can be the fastest way to harm your GI system and cause a lot of pain and bloating and so forth. And even constipation. You can have so much fiber, which is supposed to help alleviate constipation, but you can eat so much that it causes it, literally causes a massive, bulk in your GI system that you just can't pass. So, the rule of thumb, again, if you look at standard health recommendations, might be 25 to 30, 35 grams of fiber. But understanding that there's just some fiber we don't digest well, the more complex fiber. So there's a difference between having 10 grams of fiber from raw broccoli versus a bowl of oatmeal, that may have the same amount, but it's an easier to digest form of fiber. So, instead of going through all the different types of oligosaccharides and polysaccharides that make up that form of complex carbohydrate, I would just say understand that what you are consuming is 90% of your GI function. And so, look for ways to make changes and then just note those changes. You know, if I eat these certain foods, the next day, this is what my bowel habits look like. If I change this, then it improves it or makes it worse. So I think there has to be a lot of trial and error because we're all so different, but there are definite standards there that we should be working ourselves into.
I love that. That's one of the things that survivors of abuse tend to have in common is not being in our own body.
Mhm.
We have no idea, what's going on because we've sort of detached. So some of the things that you're talking about today are really not only wonderful ways physically to start to know about our body and take self-control over what's happening, but also from an emotional standpoint, not only just mental clarity, not having that foggy brain, not having that dragging feeling when we adhere to not a rigid but a healthier lifestyle. There's these mental things that are just wonderful gifts born out of that, but also learning to get into our own body and saying, boy, when I eat oatmeal, I have great bowel movement, or if I don't eat oatmeal, I don't have a bowel movement that day. Just starting to pay attention to ourselves. When I get this amount of sleep, I feel great. If I get too much, I'm dragging all day. If I get too little, then I'm crying for no apparent reason or whatever. And just that sort of doing some journaling and knowing what works for us and what doesn't, because wherever we go, there we are. And having that insight into ourselves is vitally important. What do you think about naps? Do you ever do you meditate in the afternoon or take a little cat nap? How do you do your afternoon transition?
I think the topic that you just brought up is the most central thing to making any positive change. And I don't want to say anything controversial. That's not my intent. But there is a very documented um, pitfall or obstacle to people who think dualistically. So you mentioned detachment or more clinically just disassociation. Somebody who's gone through trauma gets in the habit of saying, this is not my body, you can't hurt me, I'm a spirit or a soul, this is just the shell, my body, that you just can't hurt me. And that's a very protective mechanism. And in evolutionary psychology, that's just well known, well documented. But the the challenge to that is that we can also then stop caring as much about our bodies and forgetting that we really are our bodies. That, as you said, if we're not getting enough sleep, it's going to make everything in our life suffer, our mental state and our emotions and so forth. And so I think it is important, what you said, is to learn to come back and center into your body and understand that self-care is the most important thing you can do. It becomes so cliche, right? You can't love other people until you love yourself, and you get all this foo-foo, blowback. All of the more black and white thinkers say that's just stupid. Just shut up and do the work. And there's this dogmatism versus a more thoughtful, holistic approach to our own personal beings. And what you said is undeniable. And I did start meditating at a time when I was facing a lot of anxiety. I'm a high strung, high energy person by nature, and
Really?
normally that's an advantage.
Yeah.
But if you get stuck in fifth gear and you can't get out of it, then anxiety is no better than depression. I mean, it's just they're two very closely associated sides of the same coin.
Right.
And so if I'm feeling very, very anxious and out of control, then that, of course, depresses me. Like I said, just the different side of that same coin. So maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, I started a practice of, it's not the normal meditation where you just like focus on calming down and trying to eliminate all of your thoughts and just focus on your breath. I went through a very active form of visualization meditation because that fits me. Like that's what I needed. I didn't need to stop thinking. I needed to slow down and focus my thinking. And as neural plasticity happens, it's a long process. You have to work on one thing at a time, and then you mentally and intellectually are building skills that can help you for the next set. But you're also literally physically rewiring neurons and synapses in your brain, and so you're creating new pathways for new thought. That becomes physically, just like training a muscle or training for an athletic event, something you could not physically do 3 months ago, you can now do because you've changed your body. Now you can physically jump higher, run faster, run longer. You can do that. Your brain is absolutely no different. And so I went through this phase of doing, 6, 9, 12 months of very, very consistent meditation like that. And I got to the point where almost like self-hypnosis, I could make myself fall asleep within 3 breaths. Somebody, normally I might be up till 2 or 3 in the morning. I might miss an entire night of sleep. And, I could even just feel this adrenaline dump in my body. I mean, it was almost like somebody put cardiac paddles on my heart. And I could physically feel this boom. I could hear it. I could feel it, this shot of adrenaline. And I just knew, okay, now I'm not going to sleep the rest of the night. That was literal physical adrenaline that's not going to dissipate out of my bloodstream. Well, think of a year later of going through that kind of meditative controlled process. And instead of having that reaction, I could take 3 breaths and make myself fall asleep. I mean, that's where that internal understanding that your brain is you and that your body is central. Like if you don't take care of your body, you don't have the right kind of intellectual capacity that you're looking for. So I just think what you said is probably kind of the crux of the matter, because if we start adding layers of, well, do this, drink this much water, don't consume this, eat this instead, do this, track your miles, track your ounces, track your calories. If you're adding all of that on top of a mental state that just can't support it, it's a house of cards that's just going to fall. So you have to take care of how your brain even thinks and your brain's ability to think physically before you can start building a better stack of habits on top.
Absolutely. Well said. And thank you so much for your vulnerability in sharing that you have dealt with anxiety and that meditation is what has worked for you. I'm sure other things too, but that was one of the tools that you use. And you're right, the house of cards. For me, it is how much space do I have today? If I was in chronic anxiety, and it was just, and like you, I could feel it. For me, it would be a waterfall tingling sensation would go, and that's the adrenaline. I'm screwed for the next, however many hours till it wears off, awful. So if I was in the throes of that, what could I do? So it's a mindset for me that really helped me. Instead of saying, oh no, I'm done for the day. It always happens, what else could go wrong? Blah, 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 blah. Instead of that, I turned it around and said, okay, this is the reality for me for this portion of the day. What can I do? What is the best use of my time right now? Can I have 2 cups of coffee and then have water the rest of the day, the rest of the morning? Can I make myself eat a couple bites of oatmeal with wild blueberries in it? Can I eat a can of tuna fish, instead of a brownie or something that would feel comforting? So in that energy, I have the different parts of myself, and the child part of myself just wants comfort food. She wants to be in her blankie, and she wants to watch television and not talk to anybody. And she has a right to have her feelings, and I give her space to have her feelings. But my grown up has to say, how can I meet your need? How can I give you voice? And I'm in charge. I'm in the driver's seat. I'm going to take good care of us. And today we're going to drink our water, and we're going to eat oatmeal with wild blueberries. We're going to have some salmon, and maybe we'll have a grilled cheese for that child, but we're going to have it with Ezekiel bread, and one piece of cheese and not, whatever. And we're going to throw some turkey in it so we have some protein in there. So I try to make those choices. And if that's all I can do, some days I can do my food every 2.5 hours in my little container, and I drink my gallon of water, and I've worked out, I did my cardio, I did my weights, and I even stretched, and that's just like a boomerang day. But on times that I can't, what can I do? In the throes of anxiety, in the throes of depression, in the throes of whatever, what can I do to support myself and be in my own body? And I remember seeing Ram Dass, rest in peace. Ram Dass was really cool back in the Harvard days. Do you remember Timothy O'Leary and Ram Dass, right? So big acid trials, and right now everybody's talking about plant-based medicine, but Timothy was acid all the way for spiritual enlightenment, and Ram Dass says you don't have to do that. You can just learn to be in your own skin, which of course the Dalai Lama talks about too. And I remember him giving me a hug and saying, you know what, meditation can be as simple as you're sitting and you are imagining a train trains in front of you, and you have all these thoughts, all of these thoughts, fears and anxieties, all these words and feelings coming up, and you just name it, physical discomfort, and you just put it in the boxcar and say, thanks for sharing. I'm going to go crazy and I'm never going to come back, and I'm going to be a lunatic for the rest of my life. Fear, thanks for sharing, and you're talking about neuroplasticity. I'm not saying it right, but, being able to use our brain. It doesn't have to be this big complicated thing. It can be, what can I do? Do those little things. Just reset. Reset doesn't have to be fast. A reset can be just taking 10 minutes and letting your day sort of catch up with you, and breathing for 10 minutes and just letting it go. just letting it go. And what's the next good thing that I can do for me in this moment? Which brings me to mornings. Do you have a morning routine? Tony Robbins does this breathing priming thing, and he does a deep, cold water plunge, and all this. What is Dr. Joe's morning routine?
Yeah, mine is horrible, and it's not what I want it to be.
Mine is horrible. Okay.
First of all, I'm not gonna blame my children or my family, but at the same time, I'm part of a family with 4 children, and only one is out of the home right now. And my wife is an incredibly nurturing mother who always wants to give the kids what they need. So she tends to get up very early and make everybody the exact breakfast they want, and pack lunches and do all this stuff. And because of our work schedule, she owns a little retail store in our downtown, and we've changed our business model. So we're a little bit more mobile and have offices in San Diego and Nashville and here in Indiana. And so long story short, we commute, and my schedule now has to be part of her schedule. So it's a lot easier for me to stay up a little later than everybody else and do the kind of work that I need to focus on, whether it's academic or writing or creative time later. So I tend to sleep in a little bit more in the morning. So my morning routine is to wake up at the last second and pretty much just wolf down breakfast and get to work, so that I can have more of my morning is spent sleeping because I'm staying up later. Now, in maybe 5 or 10 years, that will be a little bit calmer,
Yeah.
and all of the self-help people that you discuss talk about, that morning routine and the setup. And one of my friends who teaches this, he does life coaching. Like he'll wake up 2 hours before he should, and he's making a list and doing mantras and goals and meditation. And like, how in the heck do you do that? Like, that's when I have to be asleep, where he's awake at 4 in the morning doing that because he can go to bed at 8 at night and I can't. So
Yeah.
one of these days I will have a more centered morning routine, but that's my life at this moment.
When is the grandbaby due?
Any day now, our first
Yeah.
grand. Yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah,
November 8th, right? Is it the baby due?
that was the due date. Yep.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I'm so excited for you.
Hmm.
So is there, I'm trying to remember different things that I think are really important. I think that the last thing would be body movement. Like how important is exercise? One of the, I showed the trophy earlier. One of the interesting things about this particular show for me was I only did weights twice a week instead of 5 times a week. Twice a week, really intense workouts, and twice a week HIIT training. That was it. It was really food, and it really blew my mind that I was able to have the best physique ever, best show ever. I always placed in my other shows, but I never looked better than I did at that one. So, how important is movement, and what is the range for movement that is just, what's the range of movement?
I think this is probably the most important thing. I mean, outside of sleep, I mean, it would be the exact opposite, but still like the just critical pivot point for any health. And it was really my first love in health and fitness, was at 11 years old to decide I'm I can see at 11 years old my life going in a certain direction in physical health or ill health, and I want to be a different person. So I put my foot down at that young age, just gaining some emotional independence and saying I'm going to do something different. So I started lifting weights and doing whatever kind of cardio you do as a kid. I remember, watching a Rocky movie or something. So I hung up a roll of carpet in a burlap bag in our garage, and I'm out there just, getting my knuckles bloody doing that, jumping rope like, Sylvester Stallone. And that changed me physically and mentally forever, because now, even at 51 years old, I miss it. A day without enough movement, and I just feel the effects. I feel horrible. I feel mentally, less acute. I just, you just start feeling bad everywhere. So I can't say that my training has changed that much from then till now. I still lift weights pretty aggressively, at least 3 days a week. Maybe I break my workout smaller and go 4 or 5. But to your point, you can accomplish a lot in a little bit of time, as long as you're consistent and you're progressive. You're just working on that small micro incremental progression to improve your heart rate, your blood panel, your orthopedic health. Everything improves with movement, and our bodies just homeostatically adapt to the least amount of work they have to. I mean, that's why an astronaut goes up into space, and within 3 weeks they can lose an appreciable amount of calcium in their bones, because there's no stress on the body. So the body homeostatically adjusts to that minimum, dose. And so it's just so important to be consistent, even if it's just something like walking. I had a client one time who, until he was in his 80s, every single day he woke up and he immediately, went out for a mile walk and came in and stretched. And then, even though he had retired 15 years earlier, he would put on his dress shirt and his slacks and grab his briefcase and go downtown to the library, and get breakfast at a little local deli and, read the newspaper and go to the post office. And he just kept this routine of movement that kept him so physically and mentally healthy up until his passing. And I mean, gosh, isn't that what we all want? Is just, we always say it's not about quantity, it's about quality. He maintained the highest quality of life all the way to his passing in his mid to late 80s. And that's, like I said, that's certainly almost, I guess, what, exactly 40 years from the time I started training. It still is the central part of my day and my week that I just would not give up. It's uncompromisable to me.
Mr. Rogers, 5 a.m. swimming at the Y.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that a person's body, whatever it is in the now moment, if it is not a beacon of radiant health, and it hasn't been for 20 years, does that have to be their future? Can they transform their body and mind through a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, we always kind of point to these extreme cases as either proof of something being horrible or amazing. But I mean, we've all heard these stories of somebody who was in a nursing home bedridden, and then they start doing a little physical therapy and then start walking, and pretty soon they're independent again. I think of one lady who literally ran a marathon after being in a nursing home prior. There is absolutely no limitation unless there is true physical impairment and so forth that would stop you, indications. But I think there's just absolutely nobody that's beyond improvements and extending their life, improving the quality of their life. It just has to start with that very first step, the first decision, and then make sure it's just consistent and just, as I said, incrementally progressive.
I have a group of, I'll be 57 shortly. And I had some doctors on who specialize in menopause, and we did a Zoom. And the one thing all the women wanted to know about, we'll have to figure out if we can make this happen with you, but the one concern all the women had was, what do we do, menopause, gaining weight? Like their next topic could be whatever. They wanted to understand hormones. And then the next thing was, how can we regain and retain radiant health? It is so important. And they asked me to ask you about that talk, but we'll do that another time. Yeah. So moving from surviving to thriving, we've covered the basics. Is there anything that you intuitively feel like we should add to that? Is there, in closing, is there anything that you want to share or add?
I would just wrap it up with the word patience and hope. Like I said, even something as physically true as neuroplasticity, we want to be that person now, and we have to know that I can adopt those behaviors and those thoughts, but the physical backup is going to be a work in progress. So I tell this to a lot of my clients who have a pretty lofty goal. They have a big transformation they want to go through. And I said, okay, here's the biggest mistake people make. They start using language like, well, once I accomplish this, then I'll be here. And once I get to this point, then life will be different. And I say, no, let's be that person now. Whatever your future self, whatever you think you're going to do that's so much better and more positive, you need to do those things now. You need to build those habits now. You need to have those thoughts now. And it has to be, as I said, uncompromising. It's just, that is who you are. You'll get there. You'll cross those lines, those markers and metrics that you're setting out for yourself. But you might not, unless you adopt all of those changes and you become that person you want to be right now. So there's that constant push and pull between, just patience and knowing that it's going to become way easier. You're building some physical habits and some mental and emotional habits that take training and time, going back to Rocky, just that physical stamina, all those physical changes, you literally will make those, but it's going to take one building block at a time. And that's just going to take a process.
Love that. I remember when I was trying to quit smoking cigarettes. Hardest thing, man. Hardest thing ever. And I kept trying to quit. And I would, go back, and I couldn't just smoke one cigarette. It was a whole pack. And what worked for me was saying to myself, when my addict would say, I need a cigarette, I would say to that addict inside me, well, I'm a non-smoker, and non-smokers don't smoke. Yeah. As silly as that sound, that was it for me. That was it for me. And I think, in trying to like ease off sugar or whatever, sort of getting back on the wagon, that same thing. Well, you're an athlete. Athletes don't eat crap, generally speaking, but they don't eat crap. They exercise, they get enough sleep. So I think that having patience and hope, and as you say, imagining as if, be that person now. That is such sage advice. And how many spiritual gurus do we know that say the same thing? Be that, imagine that, envision that. Imagine what it feels like to be that ideal weight. Imagine what it feels like to get on stage and do whatever the thing is. I think that's right on. I have watched so many of your lives and your interviews and different things that you've done over the years. Some of the same bodybuilding people, some of the coaches, that you have, you've done trainings for a lot of the coaches here on the East Coast. You've got an amazing reputation, and I am just so grateful. I almost reached out to Nancy Andrews and said, guess who I'm talking to today? I am really appreciative of you sharing your time, your wisdom, your experience with me and all of the people who are in the trenches. We are the women in the arena. And it's a good fight, because we're fighting for ourselves. And these tools that you gave are just sage wisdom. And we can say it. Sometimes I find that I can say, whatever, that's a tree, all I want to. But when you have somebody like you, that's why when I do speaking engagements before COVID, I would bring Homeland Security, I would bring the district attorney, and they might be saying the same thing that I'm saying, but when they hear it from them, it really has so much more value to the audience. And to have somebody like you have this conversation and share these truths is, and without rigidity, just this beautiful truth. And I really am wicked grateful. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. It means a lot that you would say all that, Catherine. And, just personally, all the things that I do and all the facets of my career, this kind of work is especially meaningful because, like you said, it's going to be heard by people that it could make a huge difference on their lives in ways that we just don't normally get to. And so I'm grateful to you as well for having me, and would be very happy to expand and come back again anytime you want to talk about
yay.
Topics.
I have about 24 menopausal women that will be so happy.
We'll definitely do it.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you so much. And good luck with your baby. I'm so excited. Yeah. And I don't know what the pool is up to on the birth date, but I'm excited for you. There's nothing like having a grandbaby. So God bless you and your family. Thank you.
I will soon find out. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.